to What the Hex, your source for Warhammer Underworlds, and under 30 Gnarloaks gnawing at your toes. I'm your host, Phil, and with me, as always, my trusty co-host through these Gnarloaks, it's Davy. How you doing, Davy?
I'm doing pretty well. I am really excited to be talking about this new season, and I'm glad this is getting out there. I think it's going to be a great thing for the community in a lot of different ways that we're going to get a chance to talk to later in this episode.
Oh yeah. This is a pretty substantial new box release, not in terms of the contents, but in terms of just what it's going to change about the game.
Yeah.
I assume at this point most folks have already seen the articles with a lot of the sort of biggest changes.
Yeah.
But man, there's a lot. We went through the rule book a couple different times and we still missed stuff. So
right.
This is a big one. This is going to be fun. This is going to be a good one. And I do like the new warbands too. So it's pretty exciting. But before we really dive in, start talking about stuff, let's get all of our sort of starting pieces out of the way.
Yeah.
Just to give folks a bit of context where we're recording this, and I guess sort of maybe we'll back up even a little bit further than that. So we've actually already had the box for a couple weeks at this point, and we are recording on October 17th. The pre-order release was just yesterday. Pre-order notice was just yesterday. That is going to go on pre-order on the 22nd. So this is about a week before folks will be able to go on pre-order. That is when this episode will be dropping. And then it should arrive then on the 29th. So just before November and just before Halloween. It's sort of a fitting box to go along with Halloween.
Yeah.
You may have noticed as well, we are conspicuously just the two of us tonight. And that is not to say that the rest of our folks are not going to be around. They've got plenty of stuff that they're working on. But
no, folks, we heard you loud and clear. They're terrible. They're fired. Oh, they're all gone.
No. Gone. Get them out of here. No. They've got a number of things actually that they've been working on, because we were a little bit in a holding pattern because we knew the new season was probably coming soon, but we didn't know exactly when. And then, of course, we got the box, and we are still working through a few logistical things with getting them fully onto the cast. So we had to do this review without them, and so that is why. But they will be back soon, probably on the next episode even. So we've got a number of different irons in the fire, as it were. Anyway, so I guess in that vein, some community shout outs. Obviously our own folks have got stuff they're working on. What are other people working on, Davey?
Well, I thought one real timely article that came in was on the Determined Effort blog, this Bacon Borns project. And he talked about why we need both the Nemesis format and the Champs format. And I thought it was a very thoughtful article. There was a lot of passion that got fired up by some of the Warhammer community articles, and I just thought it was a good sort of measured take on the whole situation, and I'd recommend it. It's just a few minutes to read it, and I like that people are creating that sort of thing instead of all just like, here's something about the meta and here's something about, I think that's a valuable thing to be putting out there. So hats off there.
For sure.
Well, Let's say you're one of the people out there, and for some reason you're not excited about a new season. There's actually two new seasons going simultaneously. Our bud Wathlab, Four Dwarves and a Bear. This is like an insane project of love, a fan project. It is a standalone fan created season of Underworld's Beardgrave. And it is all Dwarven / Duarden warbands. There's a revamp of the Chosen Axes, and then a number of totally unique warbands. And it's on Reddit. There's going to be a link in the show notes that has those custom warbands. It comes with custom boards, all this sort of thing, and it's kind of amazing. Like this is a project a long time coming, and it's even if you don't play it, which it would be fun to give it a spin. Even if you don't play it, it is amazing to just kind of look through. So uh, I said hats off to Baconborn. I think what would be a dwarven thing? Two hats off, runes off, rune hat, helmet off. I don't know. Uh,
Something.
Tip of the beard to Wath Lab there.
But yeah, I definitely, I have not read his article, but I have seen a number of the times he's posted with sort of his uh I guess the working through of figuring out how to make these new war bands, his unique war bands, um, and trying to sort of get feedback on the balance and the rules and how they're fitting in. They've always been, I thought, very well thought through.
Mm.
Some of them seemed like they were probably sort of just right. Some of them maybe a little too strong, but either way, that's a lot of work. And that's pretty nice. And like making actual fighter cards and everything too is pretty awesome.
Yeah, and also open to feedback. Very thoughtful and receiving feedback, which is not always something you experience with these fan projects.
Of course,
So
yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
pretty
people
pretty
get
awesome.
very close to these sorts of things, and then it's like, oh, people are shooting everything down.
Yeah.
But no, definitely, definitely. The only other thing that I can think of to shout out is actually our own little bit of community.
Oh yeah.
We have been sorely lacking in advertising for this, so I want to make sure to get it in here now. Uh, on November the 5th, that is a Saturday, we will be running another local tournament. We are calling it the Madtown Throwdown here in Madison, Wisconsin, playing at Noble Knight Games. I believe 10 o'clock is going to be the start time.
That's
Uh,
correct.
it's going to be Nemesis in honor of the new format, correct?
Yep, it will be Nemesis format. It's basically a the new season Gnarlwood will have been
Yeah.
out for an entire week.
Yeah. Release party.
Yep. So think of it as a Gnarlwood release event. We'll have 4 rounds. We're just doing best of one. We're gonna make it. We're gonna try and onboard as many people. We're gonna try and grow the community here, um, and pull in folks from around. I know we're gonna be seeing some different folks traveling in from out of town. I think there may be the Sigmar Inquisition showing up from down south a little bit. Uh, Alex has promised to burn some witches to
Oh
celebrate.
man.
So that'll be fun. I've
Yeah.
already talked about how much I love it. Thank you, Phil, for bringing this up because I think Skylar might literally have killed me if I did not include it. So,
Yes, and I'm sure we will have something in the show notes for folks as well.
mhm,
Link to the page where we have the all the details in writing, so you don't have to try and
absolutely.
feverishly jot down notes here.
If you're listening to this on the release day, it is 2 weeks from today.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Coming up soon.
Yep.
So put it on your calendars. Get ready. Should be a good time.
Yep.
Well, normally we would talk now about what the hex is going on with us, but I think you kind of probably have a guess as to
Yeah.
what the hex has been going on with us. So let's just dive right in these Gnarlwood bucks, because that is definitely what we've been working on, and it is a good time. So we're going to be talking a lot about stuff from the box, new rules, new war bands, what the new format is, stuff, you know, rules changes, narrative, as much as we can try and fit in here without going too crazy over time.
Yeah.
But
Right.
uh, with all of that, there are still a few things we don't know. Um, so just wanted to get these out of the way now so that there's no confusion about, maybe why we're not talking about these or maybe any sort of misconceptions about any of this stuff. So things we definitely know that we don't know yet. We do not know what exactly any sort of changes will be for formats. There was kind of, as mentioned already, some hand wringing about the potential shifting of championship and relic. That seems to have just been some lax word usage by the community team. Um, there's definitely still going to be a championship format, but we do suspect that with a new format change, that there might be a few other changes coming along. We definitely saw some of that happen a while back. Changes to restricted lists and whatnot. So um, wouldn't be surprised to see any additional changes there. Definitely expecting to see more details from Nemesis. We know that it's essentially Rivals Plus, as people have probably already known it.
Hmm.
Um, but there could be a number of other details that we're just not aware of yet. So
Yeah.
that should be coming hopefully along with the release of the new box. The other thing that's a little unclear at this point is rotation. Previously, it had always been a pretty clean, just 2 seasons per rotation cycle. But now that boxes are on 6-month releases, does that mean that we're going to be rotating every 18 months?
Hmm.
Um, to be determined. We do not know exactly what this is going to look like. The assumption is Dire Chasm is leaving us, and what the future holds, we're not sure yet. So we will assume, sort of as we're talking some stuff, that is going to be how it works. Is that every time we get some new boxes, we're going to be just a couple core boxes at a time. But we don't really know that. And then there are certainly things that should be addressed in FARs coming up, but when we will see one with the new season is obviously unknown to us at this point. So
Yeah,
this
not just far, but there's some clarifications in some of the guards because we were able to look at the last release and kind of assess that there's no mention of any cards from Hexbane's or Gore Chosen releases.
Yep. Yep.
So there's some erratas and uh, designer commentary needed for uh, some things minor, some things a little more outstanding. I'm looking at you. What weighty blessing is that?
Well, there's Weighty Blessing for sure. That's
Yeah,
one that definitely needs one. There's the support one from Gore Chosen
yeah.
that it's
So
like,
there's a few
yeah.
we just need a little bit of help and clarity on figuring out exactly how these are supposed to work. But we'll get there, and it's just a matter of when.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we with all that out of the way, we can dive into the box contents and some of the other adjacent releases that are going to be happening kind of at the same time. You can obviously just go and look at the article for some of that stuff in detail, but we figure we'll mention it here as well. But
Sure.
the box, what's in the box?
Not ahead.
Well,
We have the stuff that you'd typically expect. So dice boards, a whole bunch of tokens and such, and then we used to always get a two war bands, their faction decks, and then a pool of universals. And what exactly those universals have looked like have changed over time. It used to almost be a predictable reprint of great strength, great fortitude, that sort of thing. Since those things moved into essentials, that freed them up. But now, even past that, all the universals in this box are split between two other rivals decks, universal rivals decks to be clear, and that would be Tooth and Claw and Daring Delvers.
yeah,
Which does mean that there are no, as we mentioned, I think in the last episode, there's no Grand Alliance cards. Um, and I know there's been some folks who are concerned about, oh no, does that mean Grand Alliance cards are gone? They talk a bunch about the Grand Alliances like being a
yeah,
thing, and so I feel pretty confident in uh, saying that I would expect Grand Alliance specific cards to continue moving forward. So
yes.
yeah,
I
what
think I think that is fair.
yeah, what do you how do you feel about this this split, like putting it two faction rivals decks and two universal rivals decks in here?
I think it's probably going to be a good move for the whole of the community.
Hmm.
I think it gives a really great way for people to start the game. And that's really what the core boxes should be. Um, a core box really shouldn't have to feel like just an expansion. It should feel like this is a starting point. This is where you can jump into the game, get started, and have everything you need in that one box.
Mm.
Um, and if you're playing rivals, then you definitely can. You'll have the two war bands that you can just play with their rivals decks right out of the box. And then if you want to mix it up, you have two more choices to just try out straight out of the box as well.
Sure. Well,
No
and
deck
what
building necessary.
Yeah. What actually works great with this, like if you want to have a little bit of deck building, this is set up so that you can buy this box and two players can play Nemesis right away, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
because
Right.
there's two rivals decks in there or two universal rivals decks. Like I think that's actually a pretty clever play there.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and if you want to do champs, well, that's also, I mean, that's always available to you as
Of
well. So
course.
I think this was like the most flexible way they could have arranged it that I can think of.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually pretty much I think they hit it really really nicely this time around. I think both of the additional rivals decks are actually playable. Um
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about that. Like that was if you want to know more about that, and we should have mentioned this at the top, but
oh,
like
of course.
we've got a card by card review of all the cards that came out, the fighter cards, and every universal and faction card that came out in the box. But these are functional standalone decks.
Yeah.
Uh, they're cohesive, and I think it was what we had been hoping for. Like, hey, this is the new season. Let's see what they can do. Like, you think that the rivals format was an idea they had part of the way through the season with development timelines. This is maybe the first look we've had at them saying like, hey, let's make this a thing. Let's make universal rivals decks a thing.
Yeah.
And man, they are cohesive.
Yeah.
For any number of reasons, but what tell me something about it here.
Well, so I think we can pretty well use this as a springboard into some of the changes that are maybe coming. We're a little bit of speculation here, but so there's these new cards that actually kind of go along with both of these.
Mm,
They're called plot cards, and we found out that it turns out that the card for primacy and the card for desecration are also considered to be plot cards.
hmm
Those are faction specific ones.
What does a plot card mean?
Yeah. So plot cards um, essentially is a additional rule that will be introduced to the game if you include certain cards in your deck, which is actually something we should already be pretty familiar with because this is
hmm
exactly how primacy worked. So
hmm
if you
Yeah.
included
Oh,
any,
great point. Yeah.
yeah, if you included any cards that involved primacy, you essentially ended up, we didn't necessarily always have the card out when we were playing with primacy, but you did have this idea of this rule card for primacy that would then be introduced in the game at the beginning, where you'd say, yep, I'm playing with primacy, here's this card. It's going to be
Mm,
the same idea. There's one for both of these universal rivals decks for Tooth and Claw. You end up having this concept of being savage. It's
hmm
keyworded on a whole bunch of these cards. And then being savage, just basically, it's like if you're staggered or charged.
hmm
There's actually a little bit more to it, but you can go
There's
check that out.
Yeah, 2 wounds is the only other caveat. So
Yep.
two wound counters on you.
Yeah, yeah, and then there's timing and stuff that involves with
Sure.
that. But so basically, it's like, hey, this is sort of your aggro deck. You want to be savage, you want to be charging, you want to get staggered, like, and it's pretty well designed around doing that. I mean, like some of the surges, it's like, hey, if you were already savage and got a kill, you score your kill surge. It's like,
Mhm,
okay, this kind of makes sense. It all goes together. Um, and it drives you towards an objective. And of course, they're universal rivals decks. There's still cards in here that are not, bangers. It's not stuff you would always play in
sure.
championship, but it's not stuff where you look at it and you just go, what were they thinking? Why was this even in here?
Yeah, yeah, and we talked a lot about, well, I'm gonna forget the card now, but in, Illusory Might, There was one particular gambit, I think Shady Bargain, where you
Mm,
could put out an upgrade for
right.
free, and it was like this has no reason to be in this deck. It
Yeah,
doesn't.
it's all illusions. Why?
Exactly. But that doesn't happen here. Like there's cards in here,
No.
there's some that are stronger than others, and there's some cards that you won't see in championship play, but every card that's in there you can say like by and large you can say I understand how this fits into this rivals deck. So
Yeah.
even if it doesn't do anything strong for me in like broad championship play where I'm maybe not working towards, in the case of Tooth and Claw, the Savage mechanic, or in the case of Daring Delvers, the Exploration mechanic. Uh, Even if I'm not like, if I'm not leaning towards those things, then this card doesn't do anything for me. But if you say like, let me look at this from a Rivals or Nemesis perspective, then every card in there, you're like, okay, I know why that's in here.
Yeah.
This does a thing if it is looked at in the context of this format, and I like that a lot. Um, I mean, I like it. Actually, I like it a ton. Because in every season, when there's a universal release, there's always cards that are like, this doesn't really do anything. But here, like, even if they don't do, and we would always say that, but we would be saying that in the context of championship play, right?
Yep.
And here, there is a format where it has a place, where it has a role.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, I'm not going to say that they're trying to shift focus away from championship because I really don't know that, and I don't actually think that that's the case. But I do think that they're trying to raise up Nemesis. I mean, they
Hmm.
give it an official name. They're putting effort into making sure the rivals decks make more sense. And I think it's just a much simpler way to play the game, which is not a bad thing.
Hmm.
Um, there's a lot of mental load before you ever even sit down to play a game if you're playing championship.
Yeah.
Um, and people who play a lot sometimes take that for granted, but it is not straightforward. And so for people who are just wanting to play the game just to play the game, this is great. This is going to
Yeah.
make people's lives easy, and people are going to have fun with this. And I think there's enough cards in here that are good that people will feel happy to be like, yeah, I want to use this deck for my
Hmm.
aggro guys that I want to play Nemesis with.
Hmm.
Or on the flip side, you've got your sort of hold. It's invasion hold is the exploration thing. I mean, I don't think there's really another way to explain it. That's essentially what it is. You can obviously go check out all the cards on the blog if you want to deep dive there. But so it gives you your hold and your aggro, but it's not like passive hold or anything like that.
Right.
Um, so I think it'll be really good, and I am pretty excited for what it's going to be like playing Nemesis now, with more support. And I assume we're going to see more of these throughout the season as well.
Yeah. Here's another interesting thing. I didn't even. Well, gosh, man, there's so much to cover. But
I
you
know.
say assume we're going to see more of this. Uh, Often we've been able to predict like, all right, here's what this season is going to have, because you can look at here's the card count for the season.
Oh yeah,
Say this card is like number one of 254 or something like that. In this case, every card is a 1 through 32 of the rivals deck that it's attached to.
yeah,
So
yeah. So
what?
we have no idea how many total cards there's going to be.
Right. We also don't know, like, is there some way that these all somehow fit in different rivals decks uh, that seems unlikely if they have, if I don't know how Grand Alliance cards, which we feel comfortable saying are probably still in this. I'm going to throw out a possibility. What if they have Grand Alliance rivals decks?
Oh yeah,
Here's an orders, a Grand Alliance order rivals deck. Like that might be a thing. We'll see.
yeah. You could see that maybe just a whole, just a card release set that's just one for each
Yep.
Grand Alliance.
Yep.
I think that would be great. That's a good way to seed a whole bunch of cards that are relevant but limited in their relevance. So
Yep.
yeah. So I think it's interesting. I don't know, and specifically on the plot cards, it does make mention of saying like it's not based on the keywords that whether you get the rule or not. It's actually whether you're including a card with the symbol, and this is actually something new, down at the bottom, each Rivals deck has its own Rivals deck symbol.
Right.
Um, and so it says if you include a card with that symbol, you have the choice of which, if you want to include that plot, or if you have another one, you can include that plot. You only get
Mm-hmm.
one though,
Yeah. So
unless
go ahead.
unless you have a faction plot. So like if
Mm-hmm.
you play Mad Mob, you will always have primacy, and then you could have Tooth and Claw as well.
Right, exactly. So you always bring whatever your in-house thing is, desecration or primacy being the examples we know. So at the very most, a game would have 4. So like, let's say we
Yes.
had Mad Bob versus Kagras. That means we got primacy. That means we got desecration. And if they each brought a rivals deck that had a plot card, then both those rules would be in effect. Looking at the plot cards, as far as I can figure, there is, from the only 2 that we've seen, uh, it's technically your choice to have those rules in effect. There is no downside to including the rule, as
No,
far as I can figure,
they
because
really don't
you're
detract anything.
yeah, your opponent plays by those same rules, but they are not going to have anything that scores off them. So technically, your opponent could stagger their own fighters at the start of an activation, and that's what's on the Tooth and Claw plot card, with the savage mechanic. Not to get too in the weeds, but like I currently can't think of a reason why that would be advantageous to anyone. So
Yeah,
uh,
I'll give
it
you a free reroll on my
yeah,
fighters.
it may
Seems
develop
good.
somewhere down the line, but by and large, there's not a big head game of like, oh man, should I use the plot card that comes with my deck or not? So
Yeah.
yeah,
No, I think you, unlike primacy, there is pretty much no downside to these.
yeah,
So I think you'll definitely see, if people are playing with the cards that score off of them, you will see them in play.
yeah.
Um,
One more thing, and I don't know if we're I mean we've spent a lot of time on this already, but one more thing I want to mention about these rivals decks is that uh, each of the faction rivals decks and each of the universal rivals decks have a 6 surge, 6 end phase split,
yeah.
and that, I mean, that is one of the steps that has made those universal rivals decks look like this is a cohesive deck. This is a deck that would work if I just picked it up and used it like it is, or even salted in something from my faction. Did the Nemesis thing. Ever since all throughout the Ulgu season through Harrow Deep and Nether Maze, every rivals deck every rivals deck that was physical deck was a 4 surge, 8 end phase. There's weird stuff going on with the White Dwarf specific ones, but all the factions were 4 surges. So Gore Chosen, Hexbane, the guys who came in the Nether Maze, they all had 4 surges. This is an intentional move where they're like, we're gonna make sure that everybody's kind of on from. I mean, unless they change again, but like we make sure that Rivals deck is more of a functional deck going forward,
Yeah.
than it has been previously.
Yeah, and I think that's a big move. Yeah, I mean, you want people to be used to playing the game kind of the way they're the idea being that there's sort of the stepping stones up to playing at championship level. You kind of want the decks that you start playing with to be constructed the same way, I would
Sure.
think.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you get people who are like, oh, I didn't even realize that this deck didn't have, the legal, the maximum number of surges.
Yeah.
And so I think it makes sense. I don't know why we wouldn't, and of course, back in like Beastgrave, when we had, like Hrothgorn, he had 8 surges in his deck, and it's like, why? What is this? It doesn't make any sense. So finally landing seemingly on a way to just have everything be uniform and streamlined and ready to play right out of the box.
Man, did that fool really have 8? That
It
is.
was 8. It was 8.
Oh
Yeah,
my
it was
God, you're
ridiculous.
correct. Wow, that is outrageous.
Very.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's the rivals decks. I think, as we've been saying, if you want more details, we ran through all the cards. It's kind of a lot, actually, if I'm being honest. But they're all there if you want to get every single card, read through all of them, see what we thought of them. But I think at this point we should probably say a little bit of something about the actual warbands and their rival sets.
Yeah, yeah. We talked a little bit last episode about the models, because they'd been
Yeah,
previewed. We'd seen them. I will say, you and I got to play with them in person. They're, I mean, I shouldn't be surprised anymore, but like it's the thing where like as I assemble these models, I'm always like, whoa, like if it's one that didn't get me super excited right away, like the Sons of Elmore, and I was like, yeah, skeletons, okay.
yeah, they're just dudes.
Putting them together, I'm like, these guys are amazing.
Yeah,
So I was really excited about them. So not a lot new to add about the models other than as is the standard, they are pretty great. But Phil, we kind of split them one way and the other. Gnarl Spirit Pack landed in your hands. How would you
we
describe
did.
those guys?
Uh, so they definitely lean a bit more aggro, but I feel like they are a bit of a Swiss Army knife. Um, they can kind of be flexible and do a whole bunch of different things, I think. And the reason for that is because of how their Inspire mechanic works. I think it's worth mentioning just because it is very unique. Um, and we haven't, I mean, maybe somebody has spent enough time, enhancing and staring at their videos that they've had to figure this stuff out. But basically, there is this struggle and overcome mechanic that this warband has, and what that means is that when you activate a fighter, you can choose to put a spirit counter on them, and when you do, they will become a beast and gain some additional bonus. And then uh, in a subsequent activation or with certain power cards, you can then remove those spirit counters. And when you do so, after that activation, they will then be inspired.
Yeah,
And usually, their inspired side has some different bonus from their beast inspiration. So it's sort of like, which version of this fighter do you want? Which is a little bit similar to Crimson Court. But
I mean, I would say more than a little bit, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, it's definitely harkening back to that same thought. That
mhm,
you have these two inspire mechanics, and they do different things based on their side that they're on. But I think that they leaned even harder into it here. Like the inspired side seems to be a lot about like support, um, and like being able to help the rest of the warband. At least we see that
right.
on two of the fighters.
Because they're beasts or they're like in control themselves, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
and so it's this awesome thing. It was like whoever's not a beast is kind of controlling other ones who have like been given over to their bestial spirits that they're working with.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's worth mentioning here, since people are probably just now getting to start to see cards, but the art for when they're like possessed by the beast spirits
Oh my god, it's so
is
cool.
amazing, and I am really looking forward to some of the really quality painters in our community painting these guys up with their beast spirit possessions.
Yeah, it's this amazing. It's this like crazy like red spirit mask thing. It's like kind of flame ethereal thing going on. I gave a long thought to like, can I try to pull this off? I'm like, I don't think I can. I'm not a skilled enough painter to do this, but there's somebody out there who is, and I cannot wait. I'm glad you said that. And
Yeah.
I'm going to say this: the art for this whole season, like,
Oh yeah,
amazing.
it's great. It's really good
I
stuff.
say whole season. This box, I can only speak to the box. Um, I love the art style. I don't know who they got in to do this, but it's super cool,
Yeah.
really immersive.
Yeah. And so yeah, I guess just to wrap these guys up, don't want to get too much into the weeds, but the different like the different tacks you could take with these guys, like most of them are faster when they're beasts. So like you can just sort of go like speedy aggro, you can get that invasion stuff, but then like Goral Spinehammer is really tanky when he's a
Mm,
beast, and
yeah,
uh
I got a little salty about how tanky that guy was.
yeah, well, I mean that's fair. He can just on command B2 block. That is
Yeah,
pretty gnarly.
yeah.
Um So they just have a lot of like flexibility, and they can change kind of at will, which means that you're going to have to really be on your toes knowing what these different fighters are capable of.
Yeah,
Um,
you drew a really good parallel to the Crimson Court, and that sort of double sided, right? Like, uh, I think this is that same mechanic, but like further refined. It's more dynamic. It's easier to flip between the two because the problem with Crimson Court was to inspire. They almost always had to wait till the end of the round, right?
yep.
They could bloodthirst on command, but like inspiring was the end of round thing. These guys can become beasts quickly and then just slightly slower, waiting for the next inspiration step. And also, if you can find a way to remove that spirit counter either by their card. Uh, I think then they can flip to their inspired side, and that the other pieces, besides being more dynamic, they're more interconnected because there are abilities that each have, not each, like several of the fighters have, that say like, hey, when this fighter is inspired, it's going to do this benefit for all the other fighters that you have in your warband that are beasts. And so it's this crazy balancing act of like just getting it right. And when we played, you did get that balancing act very right, and had some like really powerful attacks and defense. And I really struggled to overcome that at times because it's like, man, he found the timing on these things to like really have them mesh together well. It feels like a really high skill cap to me. Like there's a really high ceiling you can go with these guys with how well you time that.
Absolutely. I was thinking the same thing. It's just that, like, I think in the hands of really skilled players, I think these guys will go far,
Yeah.
and they will have lots of tricks. I will say, and while I feel like I did execute fairly well with these guys, I did actually block myself out from some of my power cards because I didn't get the
Mm,
timing quite right. And I was like, oh, I actually need a spirit counter to be able to play this one. Or I have to not be a beast to play this one. And I just had flipped like just too soon,
sure.
and blocked myself out from playing my power cards. So
Yeah.
I think there will be a little bit of growing pains figuring these guys out, but I think there's a lot there to learn.
Yeah.
I think the only other thing that I want to say about these guys before we talk about the Velmorn skeletons
Please say
is
oaths.
that yeah, we got
Yes.
these oaths coming back. So if for folks who maybe weren't around during the Godsworn Hunt release, they had these objective cards that were called Oath of something. A lot of them
For
were
the
like,
God sworn, it was like all the generic stuff. There's
yeah,
oath of annihilation, oath of denial, oath of supremacy, oath of conquest.
yeah. So
Boom.
I mean,
That's it.
it was kind of what you would expect. It's like, hey, it's denial, so therefore no enemies in your territory, which is actually quite difficult to pull off. And the payoff, well, okay, so the way oaths worked for folks who didn't remember, who don't know or weren't playing at that time, is basically if you had an oath in your hand at the start of the round, you would say, I'm going to declare this oath, and you'd reveal it. And if you then scored it, you would get an extra glory off of the card. So like you could score annihilation for 6,
Right.
if you somehow were able to score annihilation. Uh, Obviously, those were very cool in flavor, but in practice were not all that amazing. Uh, they went back to the well with these guys. They're all of their oaths are base 1 glory, but they're all very interesting objectives. Some of them are surges, and
Right.
so if you can manage the oath side, like to declare them, turning these all into 2 glory. I mean, 2 glory end phases are already sort of the standard, and then 2 glory surges are really great. So
Yeah.
I think it's going to be pretty fun to try and like build your deck to be like, how can I make sure that I can declare these oaths and score them uh, well declaring them?
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
so,
lean even more into that thing we were talking about, like the high skill ceiling on these
oh
guys.
yeah, man.
Knowing when and when not to declare your oath is going to be huge because it does a couple things. It says like, hey, I have this. Here's exactly what you can do to block it. Or there's almost like a counter there. Like, hey, I'm coming after, there's one that's the Oath of Slaughter, which is I am going to try and kill 2 fighters. I'm going to try and kill a large enemy fighter. Let's say there's all of a sudden you're saying like, I am all out aggro this round. And then the other player has to decide like, okay, like how bad do I want to try to deny this surge? Like, I don't know. I love what they did with
Yeah.
this.
No,
Very cool.
I think they really did a good job with this warband, and I am super excited to play them. Um, but we don't want to do a full deep dive on each of these warbands. We'll be here
Right,
all
right,
night.
right. Yep.
So, as much as we love them, we should also give some love to Velmorn and his sons.
Yeah,
Uh, these guys, as you said, great models. I think so. I think there's going to be a lot of people who just pick these guys up for the models.
sure. I have a lot of friends who do not play Games Workshop games, but they do D&D and that sort of thing. And like this is that kind of model that they would scoop up.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm saying this, and I'm almost certain that Zach over on Path to Glory said like literally the same thing. But we'll
Oh yeah. I mean,
yeah, fair.
probably,
Yeah,
but like they're just generic. I mean, they're just skeletons, right?
yeah,
They're all skeletons are just a very common thing in fantasy
right.
of all varieties, and these guys are some really great skeleton warrior models. So
Yeah.
yeah, thoroughly expect to see these getting converted and used for all sorts of different stuff.
Yeah. So I'll talk about these guys real quick because I was the one who ran these. Um, they're a little bit more of a head scratcher, if you ask me. Like the big thing is that the inspire is that there needs to be an attack that crits that, so they have to crit with an attack, crit success to be clear. Because you got me at least once where I had like a crit and a
Yeah,
hit, and you're like, okay, well, I'll crit and defend. Like, oh my god, like you just denied like three inspires with that. Um, so they're doing that crit fishing thing, which we often see with Stormcast, not necessarily always crit fishing, but like a thing where they're like looking for a success or looking for
yeah,
whatever. There's some dice roll that needs to happen. Um, that makes the inspiration kind of swingy. They and the other pieces that they have. The background is there's the king and then his four sons, but one of those sons is illegitimate, and that is Sir Jedrin, who is huge, by the way.
yeah,
Really cool
like
model.
ogre size.
Yeah, yeah, he's a beast. Um, the three Trueborn sons are all Graveguard. Sir Jedrin is not, and the Rivals deck comes with a lot of stuff that says like, "Hey, are you Graveguard? Cool, then do this thing." And so Sir Jedrin is on the outside looking in, and obviously the king himself is not using those on himself. So it's this thing of like kind of crit fishing, setting up supports. It has a number of ways to like get kind of support tricks in there, which can help with the inspire and accuracy and all that sort of thing. And so at first glance, they seem kind of understated on their attack profiles, but I think a lot of it comes from trying to set up supports. So if you can find a way to set supports up, I know that if I was running this in a champion style thing, like I'm looking at unfair fight pretty quickly
Oh
because
yeah,
that'll get you extra rolls and add extra grievous on there, which we'll talk about at some point here. But um, that is what, and then some of their objective deck is talking about like holding objectives, and they're pretty permissive. That it's like have one in your territory and one somewhere else, or have one in your territory and have killed this number of people or whatever. Like there's you don't have to hold a ton.
yeah,
And like any death warband, there's a little bit of resurrection in there, but it's of the warbands that have some kind of ability to resurrect in house. This is the one that is the toughest. Like there's
yeah.
no on card thing like Grimwatch or Sepulchral Guard. There's a few power cards that make it happen. Um, and as long as
And
partial resurrection is around, you might be bringing that in championship. But yeah, go
yeah,
ahead. Sorry.
yeah. I was just thinking that like, you know, you have to be so careful with the like on fighter card resurrection because we've seen it be
Mm-hmm.
very strong,
Yep.
and it generally means that you need to have smaller, weaker fighters initially because they can just keep coming back. So you don't want to have some big scary fighter who just keeps coming back.
Yeah.
And I think this works pretty well for that. But the question then is just the like, is it good enough? And I think we'll have to kind of wait and see. In our game, it didn't feel like it really mattered. Um, and actually, in the case where you did resurrect one fighter, I ended up getting to kill him again
Yeah.
and kill somebody else. So it kind of just meant you bled some glory because
Yeah.
they come back vulnerable. So it's like the
Right.
infaction, uh, whatever it's called. Um,
Partial resurrection.
yeah, partial resurrection.
Yeah.
Um, so like not bad by any means to be able to get a fighter back for an activation, but like you got to be careful with it. It's not
Yeah.
just a free roll to have your fighter back.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and like I don't know, looking through this faction deck, they're pretty aggressive, and like you mentioned, they're trying to rely a lot on crits. They're trying to rely a lot on support, and it just the feeling that I got playing into them is it was like if the dice would go well for you, I feel like these guys would be amazing. And if
Yeah.
the dice don't go well for you, or if your opponent's dice are really hot, it's probably not going to feel too great. And that's
Yeah.
sort of how the game kind of felt. Is it was like
Yeah.
Davey was having to work uphill, and the other guys, the Gnarl Spirit Pack, they can kind of just turn it on whenever they want.
Yeah.
Um, and it felt a little imbalanced, but that's not awful. I think in championship these guys will be a lot better.
Yeah. And there was some, there's some dice went each way early on. You went and Kira has an insane scything attack, which we'll
Yes.
talk about on another thing, but ran into a crowd of my guys, and then whiffed it. Like it was really
And
bad,
everybody.
Yeah. Um, and I was like, sweet, because then my counterattack was a chance to, if I'd managed a crit on the counterattack, it would have landed
Yeah.
me, I think
Four
four
inspires.
inspires or something like that,
Yeah.
but I missed it, and so and there was a thing where it was like a crit in that dice roll would have been
Well,
insane,
yeah.
like what
Yeah.
the impact it would have had on the game, maybe.
Yeah.
um
And so I think we've mentioned it enough at this point. They're going to be a swingy. There's going to be ups and downs. I think any mechanic that's designed around crits,
yeah,
there's just gonna be times where you're like, man, if only I'd rolled a crit.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Should make for some great stories, though.
There's enough that already goes in that, on enough of that already goes on in this game.
Oh yeah,
Like if
yeah.
I'd only rolled a crit,
Oh, if only. But anyway,
but I think there's enough there to like it feels like more than just crit fishing. That's a part of what they're doing, but I'm
yeah,
looking forward
yeah,
to
yeah.
exploring them a little bit more. So
And I think it's worth mentioning. Sir Jedrin is a tank. He
yeah,
is a real boss, and I
he's a
think
tank, but you killed him in like 2 activations. You
well,
rude man.
I made him a priority to kill, and I
Yeah,
think you're gonna
yeah,
have to because he is a
yeah,
monster. And he'll do work. So
yeah. I
anyway,
mean, this is a fair point. Like he starts out at 3 damage, and the king starts out at 2 damage and grievous. So you have two fighters that can be at three. Basically are threatening 3 damage right out of the gate, which is strong for any
yeah,
warband.
yep, yep, very scary. Um, yeah, but so that is the contents of the box.
Mm,
From like a you know what what are the physical contents.
yeah.
But we also have, of course, a new rule book. Um,
What?
and ooh, it's a doozy. There's a lot going on in here.
Yeah.
Um, do you want to start with some of the narrative stuff and just give a quick hit there, or go straight into the crunchy new
Yeah. I mean,
rules
the first
stuff?
thing it leads off with is some narrative components, and I enjoyed reading them. I'd recommend you take the time to kind of page through. I know it's not always for everybody that plays this game, but I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah,
Um, it talks about the mountain Beastgrave, also in Gur, because we are in the realm of beasts. Narwood is in Gur, the realm of beasts.
yeah,
Uh, Beastgrave has collapsed from a surge of magic, so it is really tied into some of these big events that are happening in the Age of Sigmar universe. And if you want to hear more about those, go listen to the Story Phase. That's the flagship Mortal Realms podcast. Um, Curiously, there is no mention of the Ulgu seasons.
yeah.
It's almost as if Nether Maze and Harrow Deep didn't happen narratively, and those seasons in Nether Maze, it pretty clearly pointed to I think what Iron Soul of the
Mm,
Condemned. She got out of the Nether Maze and found herself in Hish, and then this takes us just kidding, you're back in Gur thing. And so I
yeah.
really wonder, like this feels like maybe a thing that somebody up top says, hey, like let's tie in Warhammer Underworlds and Warcry together, which I'm all for. But it does require maybe some sort of retcon or something like that. But
Yeah. I Yeah, I agree that there's some inconsistencies there. I think maybe a nice way that they can kind of get out of that though is that like in Ulgu, like memory and stuff was all just sort of you you know getting lost in the shadows and forgetting
sure,
about stuff and like
if there was ever a realm where you were not going to remember what you did there, it's Olgu,
yeah,
right?
yeah, Ulgu in Vegas. Um anyway, so you yeah, I mean I don't know. I was very excited about the prospect of going to Hish. I thought it
hmm
was going to be cool. See a new realm, see what it was going to look like to be in a new realm. But Gur makes a lot of sense. It keeps us tied to Warcry, which I think is probably for the best because it allows the two games to sort of move together in
Yeah,
the future, and that may mean some cross pollination of like models as well.
and
And
players. I mean,
Warcry,
that's an important, right? Like,
well, yeah,
can't overlook
yeah. I
that.
mean, hopefully they're not just coming to steal all of our kits.
Yeah, hands
I
off,
mean, we
they're
already
ours.
hands up.
Yeah.
Well, I in some ways, I'm joking, but in other ways, it's kind of like, there was a little while there where Crimson Court were flying off the shelves
Oh
because
man,
people
yeah,
wanted them for Age
yeah,
of Sigmar. And in some areas of the world, it was pretty hard to get your hands on them to actually have them to play with.
yeah,
And that is something that, Games Workshop should probably try and figure out a way to fix.
yeah,
Um, you know, there shouldn't be significant supply issues for a game like this that's been around for 5 years.
yeah,
You know, um, but that is not to say that we don't want Warcry people around. I think having people who play both games is just it's just a benefit. The more people
yeah,
we have playing our game, the better.
yeah,
So if including the narratives together means that people from Warcry will dabble in buying some of these kits and pick up the game incidentally, then that is a good thing.
yeah.
Um,
Uh, for people who are interested in the narrative, the Gnarlwood is a spot in the realm of beasts, and specifically, and this is a thing that is happening in Warcry. There's the rune of Talaxis,
yeah.
and this is the Seraphon, the Lizardmen, have these like big cosmic vessels. One of them has crashed, right?
Hmm.
I think they called it like the Eye of Kotek or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's a really cool hook, right? Like this big craft arc crashed. It has treasures, like that's what's drawing people here. Some of them, and I what I really like to see is them put together like here's a story and like what are small ways that we can represent this,
Oh
and some
yeah.
of those is like of the feature, like all 9 of the feature tokens look like they are Seraphon artifacts or shattered pieces of Seraphon structures or that sort of thing. You're like, yes, I love it. Like now I have this theme that I can work on. Um,
Yeah.
just picture or whatever. Like it's great.
Yeah, and consciously tying all of that stuff into the season, I think, is pretty great. I feel like sometimes, uh, the idea of like, so I think maybe Beastgrave was probably one of the best, where they were like, hey, you know, inside the mountain of Beastgrave, everybody's being driven to these like animalistic tendencies, and you have this undying hunger or whatever. But then like tying the actual like story into the mechanics didn't actually work out all that well. Um, you know, I won't say that Hunger was a complete failure, unlike some folks that we know, but I think that it could have definitely been better. And I'm hoping that, they seem pretty committed to this story that they've got going in both games, and we'll be able to tie a lot of that together as we go forward. I thoroughly expect to see cards that reference some of this stuff directly.
Right.
And I
Absolutely.
think that'll be pretty great. And hopefully a new Seraphon warband. We already saw. Hey, I mean, gotta get it in when it can, right? And we already saw some new skink models, which was super great for Warcry. New, similar to
Oh,
Autopilot,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh,
but
man.
different poses and stuff. So pretty
Yeah.
great. Um, I'm super excited. I don't know that it necessarily means anything, so I'll just mention it quickly. But in one of the, I guess it was the narrative Orcom article, they had some art, some splash art that they had in that article, and one of them was actually a battle between the Hashut Warcry guys. The point is that it's two Warcry warbands fighting, and the article is about underworlds, and it's like, well,
Horns of Hashut.
horns of Hashut, that's right.
Okay.
uh and then the other one was Iron Golems, which has been since the first edition of Warcry. um and so it just made me wonder, like, are we potentially going to get cards for Warcry warbands, or is this just
Mm.
something where they're like, hey, just setting up the background and we're just showing these guys because that's the art that we already have?
Mm.
um I wouldn't be upset either way, but if they wanted to just be like, hey, these models that already exist, here's cards,
Yeah.
that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. Gorgeous
um
models.
yeah, very very nice. I guess the only thing that maybe makes me think they wouldn't do that is there's too many options. There's usually like 10 different types of models, I think, in those
Hmm.
boxes, and that's probably
Hmm.
a bit much for our game. But
Yeah.
either way, pretty cool. Love having all this stuff tied together. The sort of jungly aspects of Gur is very different from what we had before. So I do like that the boards don't look anything like what we saw from Dire Chasm or Beastgrave.
Yeah.
Um,
A mea culpa on my part. Looking at the kind of video, I assumed there was a ton of spider webs on the boards themselves. The board I thought that was like all spider web is actually like all splintered gnarl oak. It's like crazy
yeah.
predatory bark question mark something like that. But
Yeah, I was thinking maybe like brambly type, like
mm,
branches maybe that
yeah.
like reach out to grab at people. But either
But
way,
I was gonna say in my defense, the backside of the objective tokens are webs, but even that's not necessarily true. Like I'm looking at them like they're they might be, but I think they're just like tangled roots. So, which
yeah,
makes sense. Yeah.
yeah. But so yeah, this forest theme, it looks very different. So even though we're back in a place we've been before, it's not gonna be like a rehash of anything we've seen before, and I think that's good. It
Yeah.
helps differentiate, and it makes sense. I mean, Gur is a very diverse realm. There's a whole lot of different settings that they could use, so it made it probably easy for them to be like, hey, it's okay, we can go back here and it won't feel the same.
Yeah. I mean, these right, exactly. Like these realms, if you're familiar with Age of Sigmar or the broader game, then the realms are near infinite, each and every one of them
Yeah,
of the eight
yeah,
total realms, and so it's kind of fun to like see some diversity within those. So
absolutely. Well, we have talked a lot about the actual warbands, some of the background of the setting, just a whole lot of stuff. But we've already made mention a number of times now about a lot of these rules changes, and we are going to try and run through all of them. Hopefully, we haven't missed anything else at this
yeah,
point. Um, but if we do, forgive us. we will, I'm sure, get caught up to speed just like everyone else eventually.
yeah,
But let's uh let's just run this down. There's a lot to get through. So
yeah. And I'll
top
say
to bottom,
this.
I think just makes.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks that mention how there's errors in the Warcom, the Warhammer community articles, but like honestly, like, kind of saved my bacon. I was the first one to look at the rule book between the two of us. And what I discovered is like the absence of a rule is much more difficult to detect than the presence of a new rule. And
Yes.
so that is a way of saying the whole thing with move and charge tokens I totally overlooked when I first went through, and that's a big one.
Yeah.
What's the deal with move tokens?
Yeah. So the new changes for folks who didn't see, um, move tokens now mean instead of this fighter cannot move or charge anymore, it is just going to mean that this fighter cannot charge. So after you make a move action, you'll get your move token as normal, and then if you need to move again, you can do so.
Huh.
Um, that's
Not so special now, are you, exiled dead? Just kidding.
yeah, or Soul
You're
Ray
very
even.
special. Yeah, right.
uh, yeah. What do you do now?
I mean,
Um,
Soulray do have that ability to charge after they moved,
that's
which
true.
is
That's
pretty
true. That's still
significant. But
pretty special.
yeah,
But yeah, this is pretty huge. There's a lot of times, um, either because you knew someone had already moved, so they were
yeah.
locked down, or like with Autopoddle or some of the nets and stuff, where you could put down move tokens, you could lock somebody in place
Oh
to
man.
know that they're
Yep.
not going anywhere.
Yep.
That's not the case anymore.
Yeah.
And
I'll be
so
honest. I totally overlooked that piece myself. That's
yeah.
something else. All right.
So, I mean, now of course the nets are all rotating out with Dire Chasm, we
Yeah.
assume, but Autopod is still going to be around. But throwing move tokens on people is not as impactful as it was,
Yeah.
and I think time will tell how impactful this ends up being. But it feels like it's going to mean that there's uh, some interesting strategic play for hold warbands specifically.
You nailed it there. Like, I think this is a bigger deal for hold warbands than it is for aggro warbands, because for an aggro warband, uh, gaining a move token is at the very least costing you an activation, because also now you can't charge. So you're gonna have to move there for one activation and then attack in the next activation, and that's assuming that they're even still there, right?
Yep.
Um, whereas hold warbands are like, oh, move token, cool. I'm still going to walk into the corner and grab this feature token that's sitting here or whatever. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, that's a good differentiation to point out.
Yeah, and I guess it makes counterplay for when you're playing into hold warbands a lot harder, because if you push, if you use a push enemy fighter card too early, they might just walk them right back on.
Yeah,
Um, so I mean, timing is going to become a lot tighter now, I think.
I mean, I think it
Um,
pushes even more stuff to the end, the
yeah,
last power step,
final
right?
power step is just going to be like a flurry of
And
turn to
if we're
beyond.
pushing more stuff to the last power step, do we see a little more no time?
Hey,
Yeah,
maybe. Uh,
podcast
it
favorite,
it
no time.
finally gets its moment
Yeah.
after 5 years. My time has come.
No time like the present. Is there a
Eh,
joke there somewhere? All right. Yeah.
somewhere.
All right.
You delve deeply enough, um, and greedily enough. But yeah, so that's move tokens. I mean, it's simple, it's straightforward, but I think it's going to have a really big impact.
Yeah.
But to go along with move token changes, we're also seeing charge token changes. What are they doing with charging, David?
Yeah. So it's worth mentioning what it previously used to mean. It used to be that if I have a charge token, I cannot activate again. I could still take actions if they were triggered by like power cards, but
Yeah,
that was it. Now that still holds true unless every fighter in my warband has a charge token, and then I can be activated, but I cannot take a super action.
yeah,
So, uh, mostly for those who don't know, a super action is two actions combined. Most commonly seen in a charge, which is a move and attack, but often also seen in a scything attack, which is attacking everybody around you. So this is most important in the final rounds, like round 3, often, where you end up with, like, there's two fighters left in one warband and one in the other, or one on one. And it always used to be this thing of like, okay,
Yeah.
Who is going to commit first? They're going to take so that roll off in the last round would always be this thing where like, oh man, like, do I want to risk taking the first activation? It means I don't have power card support, but it does mean I have the chance to like kill the enemy before they get a chance to do anything.
Yeah.
But what I risk is that I will then no longer be able to activate for the rest of the round. That's no longer the case. You will still potentially be stranded. You would charge, and then if the enemy walks away from you, then you have to like try to move after them. Um, but it's not. It used to be like if I have one fighter left and I charge it with the first activation of the round, my next three are just drawing cards. Um, my first impression, I'll be interested to hear yours. My first impression of this was a little bit negative because I really like that kind of dynamic of like the tension of deciding there. But on further reflection, I'm like, I think I actually like this. Like it's not a super exciting game to be like, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to cycle objectives and draw power cards for my next three activations. And you still are really limited, right? Like I've charged, and like even if I'm down to a one fighter warband, I can charge, but now I can't charge again. So hopefully I've got better than range one, but it's easier for somebody to just like move away from me, and then I can walk after them, but then they can walk again. Like
Yeah.
I think this is I think it's still a big deal to have a charge token on your important fighter. They're very limited in what they can do from there on out.
Yeah. I mean, I felt like this was a weird change when I first
Mm,
read it. It was kind of like this probably isn't necessary. And I think I'm still kind of in that camp. It's probably just not really all that necessary. I think it disproportionately helps fighters with range 2 or 3.
100%.
Um, they'll be able to charge into a position where then they know they can just keep taking shots
Yeah.
or swinging with their range 2 attacks. And um, I think that there was some high level play where you could sort of set up for that. If it got to that point, you were like, well, if I play this right, I know my opponent only gets the one activation. And you could play with around that. And that's going to be harder now. It's not going to be a huge deal, but like there's just many times where like they get in a position and then they stick you somehow where you're stuck too close to get away from their range attack, and then they're just going to swing 3 more times or something.
Yeah.
um we'll see. I'm not, I think that the rules team really hasn't had any, egregious mistakes in anything that they've done so far with the game. So I don't think this is going to end up being that way either. I'm just not really sure um, that it was a necessary change. I think it didn't really play out all that much anyway, um, to where like you felt like you really needed this. And except maybe the exception being with like elite warbands where you're like, I only have 3 fighters. I always have a dead activation.
Right.
And so now maybe they have a little bit more play with 3 fighter warbands,
That's a good,
um,
interesting point.
which, you know, we'll see. We'll have to really kind of play this out more to know if that is a big deal.
Mm,
Um, but I could see like Gore Chosen or, I don't know, take your pick. Any of the 3 fighter elite warbands that like to smash, uh, crushes,
mm,
they could really benefit from having that fourth swing in here, in the early turns. So it should be interesting. I mean, it's a big change. It's a same with move tokens. These are two
yeah.
huge changes that completely change the way the game plays. And so I think we can't even really know yet
Yeah.
how these are going to play out.
And
I think it'll
it's
probably
not
work
the,
out
yeah.
fine.
Yeah. 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 It just gives more options for those small fighter warbands because it used to be like I've got 3 fighters. My first activation is going to be draw a power card, and then go from there. Unless there's something like
Yep.
very different that I'm seeing. But yeah.
Very. Yeah, absolutely. One not so significant change, but worth noting. There is one additional. Inspire step that's been added in. You want
Yeah.
to run us through that?
So they had put Inspire steps in after an activation and uh, uh, after the power step.
Yep.
That was something that was already established, and then they had errata in one that's like at the end of the round and the start of the round or something like that. So now the way it looks is you have the steps of a turn. There's before your activation starts, there's a reaction, inspire, surge, and then there's the activation itself. And after the activation, there's reaction, inspire, surge, and then there's a power step. And after the power step, there's reaction, inspire, surge. So that same three gets repeated. And that is a way to clean up this like thing of do like the war bands that it's important for them in like a particular round, do they inspire, that sort of thing, have they met it. When we first saw this, we are like, oh man, like does this impact like Thorns of the Briar Queen and Drepper's Wraith Creepers? And as far as I can figure, the answer is actually no, because their card reads this fighter inspires if at the start of their activation, whatever the case may be, like in the case of Thorns is adjacent to an enemy fighter, or in the case of Dreppers is within 2 of an enemy fighter. That initial reaction, inspire, surge happens before their activation starts. So I think they're still they're meeting that condition, but they will not actually inspire until the end of their activation. So I don't think we see any shift in that. I think it's just like a cleaner way of doing this, because historically anything that they say this happens at the start of the round or end of the round, it's been problematic because the timing on that is kind of awkward.
Yeah. Right.
We have to figure that out. So
that makes sense. That's a very, very good catch. And I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. It almost feels like this sort of pre-activation check was almost, almost intended, like it should have been for ghosts. But I think you're right. I don't think it should affect them because it's going to happen before the trigger. So I don't know if maybe we'll see some sort of comment about that, or like you say, it could purely be a cleanup thing for a whole bunch of other stuff in the game. But either way,
and I'm open to the fact that I could be wrong. I could be reading this wrong. So I'm interested in see when other people get in. This is like super minutia stuff that if we have any new players listening, they're like, oh my god, this game, get me out of here.
I mean, if this is the sort of stuff you like, then there is a place to talk about this kind of stuff and debate this stuff. But I think for the vast majority of players, just know that if for whatever reason your fighters would inspire before you activate, there is now an actual trigger spot for that.
Right.
Another, I think, fairly impactful but small and easy to understand change is that they've changed, and I think people kind of already caught on to this from some of the videos. Grievous is now going to be stacking similar to knockback. So if you look at the Sons of Velmorn, they'll actually have stuff on their cards that says Grievous 1, which sort of indicates that there is such a thing as Grievous 2 and so on. I did not actually get to look directly at the rules text, but my understanding of it is to just say that if you have multiple instances of Grievous, they will all combine.
That is exactly what it says. You will.
All right.
And so Sanson Farstrider's nuclear Star Falcon is back, baby.
Yeah, man. Watch out. That bird's going to hit you for like 5 damage. But this is actually a pretty big deal, right? I mean, there's going to be times where somebody's loaded up with double Grievous, and they're just going to be like, all right, if I crit this, suddenly you're taking like 5 damage, and it's just going to be game over.
Yeah. I think I'm not like going to throw a fit about anything here. I think I'm a little bummed that like crits, crits are a big enough deal already. I think this will introduce this thing like, okay, somebody's rolling. If they crit, they kill me. If they don't, then it doesn't matter or whatever. So
Right.
we'll see how much that plays
Yeah,
in.
yeah. I think it'll be interesting for certain war bands. They'll like really lean into this, but it's like it makes for this just very swingy sort of mechanic, and
Yeah,
there's going to be some feel bads, but overall, not a huge change, but something to keep in mind. Somebody can
sure.
be coming at you with their festering Skaven and Grievous for like 5 or something, and crit into 7 damage, and it'll be like, what?
Yeah.
uh, because they already have a Grievous 2 card in their deck, so they could be
Yeah.
packing a couple different forms of Grievous and suddenly have some ridiculous stuff happen. So a somewhat minor rules change there with Grievous. We got another sort of big one though with some of the objective rules. What's happening with objectives?
I mean, you said it like it. We kind of buried the lead here. I think this is the most impactful of these, and that's saying a lot because like the move and charge thing is a big deal. But one is that objectives start face up, and honestly, like I overlooked this the first time I read it because it talks about placing them face down, but then
Yeah.
once they're all placed, you flip them over. So it's the thing where like if you care about the numbers, you get to hide which numbers are going where. With the objectives that you're placing, the backside is cover. The face up side to start are the objectives, and that's kind of a big deal for a number of war bands. Certainly, any war band that has a temporary victory equivalent, Grimwatch being the most notable, basically makes in the name of the king a pretty viable objective again for that restricted slot.
Yeah.
Um, and it's also a big deal for anyone who is running, so like infestation or claim the city, like these things that said, hey, like as long as you're holding all of something, those just got a lot harder because the default is that all the objectives are showing, and you are now, the onus is now on the person trying to score that objective to get those other face up objectives flipped. I mean, there's this is especially with the set of cards that came out in Harrow Deep and Nether Maze. Like there's a whole bunch of rippling effects. I don't know if you have any that jump to mind.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's just so many things that cared about being in cover, either as like a defensive bonus or an offensive bonus, or targeting people in cover. And there's just going to be a lot of warbands now that if they didn't care that much about cover to start with, they're not going to probably want to go to a lot of effort to care about cover now.
Yeah,
Like, so if I'm playing my stalkers now, I'm probably gonna, for the most part, ignore cover as much as I can. And
yeah,
there's actually another piece of this that I think is worth mentioning now, and that's there's a change to the delve rules.
yeah. This is a
Um,
great time to talk about it.
and it really sort of drives home how big of an impact this is, and that so to delve, it's still the same thing as it used to be. You can choose to delve in the power step if you're on top of a feature token. Doing so will stagger that fighter.
Yeah.
That is a really big deal in and of itself because now your opponent will have a reroll against you. So you're not as safe being in that cover. And then they also added a change to say that if you are staggered, you cannot delve.
Mm.
That hurts.
It does. And, I think you and I both kind of looked at this initially and we saw it for okay, like if I have the stagger keyword, if I'm Dentalos and I'm zapping people and staggering them, like I can block this. If I'm Snip Padpaw, I can run up and smoke bomb them and all of a sudden they can't delve. Like, oh yeah, that's a big thing. I think the bigger thing is that it basically means that every fighter, besides having a significant downside for delving in the first place, they are only going to delve once per round unless you have some kind of like guard power card shenanigans or something else, or take an entire activation to put a fighter on guard so you can delve again.
Yeah.
So it used to be, I mean, it was totally reasonable. Maybe reasonable is the wrong word. It was totally common, a common sight to see a given fighter delve two, three, four times in a round in order to manipulate a particular feature token to be the face up side that either benefit them for cover or as an objective for scoring something, or just to flip it to get um, sudden revelation or ever downwards or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, this is a sea change to that whole system.
Oh yeah. I mean, even just something that was as ubiquitous as sudden revelation. All of a sudden you're like, do I spend a restricted slot on this?
Yeah,
Like, it's not going to be as simple as it used to be. You effectively will need to wait until probably the end of the round to score it. And surges that you can't just score on command are not what you want.
yeah.
Um,
Well, and add to that, if you're a warband that cares about holding objectives, uh, sudden revelation is suddenly a problem because I'm like, okay, I'm
yeah,
going to flip this objective. That fighter that just flipped it cannot flip it back because they are now staggered and
right.
cannot delve again.
Yeah,
And now I've accidentally flipped too many, and maybe I had path to victory and I would have two objectives and have killed a fighter, and I'm loading one because I've delved two of them.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, this change probably in conjunction with the objective changes is going to completely change all the decks. There,
Yeah,
I don't see how any deck survives this change.
yeah,
Um, if you were playing something that cared even remotely about flipping or holding before this box comes out, your deck probably needs to change.
yeah,
Would be my guess. So
yeah,
interesting
yeah.
times. It will be cool to see what comes out. I like having all the new deck building challenges, but this is a big one, and
It is.
I think I think it's going to bring the power level way down. Honestly, I think there's going to be some decks now that struggle.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's gonna take some time to see. Combine this with, I mean, I mean, this is a time where you look at the cards in your deck and you say, does this card refer to an objective token? Does it refer to a cover token or a cover hex, or does it refer to a feature token?
oh
And
yeah,
those cards that refer to a feature token, much bigger deal because
yeah,
it's so much harder to manipulate a particular feature token to be the side that you want it to be.
absolutely. Stock is going way up on
Yeah,
those. Speaking of other things that will probably have stock going up, um, there are a whole bunch of power cards that talk about flipping objectives or cover tokens.
yeah,
Um, I think that all of those cards that we basically never saw get played, people might look at them now.
sure.
There's a good reason to want them.
Yeah,
Uh, Either to mess up your opponent's plans because you're like, hey, I want that to not be an objective, or to be like, I need to get stuff back to being objectives, and I don't have a good way to do that without putting my fighters at risk.
yeah,
It should be very interesting to see how many of those cards people decide are worth playing.
yeah,
Um, and then, and in conjunction then with something like Sudden Revelation, you can score that with power cards. You don't have to delve.
sure.
Um, so maybe you still see it because people are running in a flip tech. But either way, like, it's just there's cards that were basically just afterthoughts. You never even considered them that now are probably going to be heavily considered for a lot of decks.
Yeah, it felt like in Harrow Deep and Nethermaze, there was a surprising number of cards that like did things that was like flip tokens, and a lot of them were involved light or whatever. But like flip this token, and you're like, well, that doesn't. I mean, it's so easily reversed, and
Yeah.
yeah, so way up on those. Waking Gate being one of those. That was the one that like locked all the. I mean, it's part of the Uber combo, right? Open the Waking
Yeah,
Gate, but it was a power card that said every objective hex is kind of locked in its objective side. Every feature token that is currently objective cannot be flipped back
yep,
unless it gets moved or whatever the case may be. But cards like that, like all of a sudden, kind of a big deal potentially. Like if it's really important for you to keep the enemy out of cover, or for you to make sure that somebody doesn't flip your stuff. Like I like the deck building, the championship deck building challenge that introduces.
absolutely. Um, and since we're here and we're talking about feature tokens and stuff, I think it is also worth mentioning that the introduction of first with lethal hexes and then with gloom hexes, placing additional feature tokens during the board setup, that is not happening anymore.
Mm.
What is going to happen with those feature tokens, Davey?
So any tokens that are not currently on the board are considered available tokens, and that's going to have the two additional ones, and those are double sided. They still have the backside is cover, but now they're side up. That would be an objective on a normal feature token or a feature token that's initially placed. That side is a snare, so it basically staggers you if you end up in it. Um, Not a lethal, as some might have thought, including myself. Those can be placed with a plunder reaction. This is a universal reaction anybody can use, and I the wording on this is important because it is not. I imagine this to be like after, because that's how it read to me. But the plunder reaction is use this during a friendly fighter's attack action that takes the target out of action after the out of action check. Place one available feature token in the hex that the target was in with the objective token face up. So if it is available, it's interesting that they worded it specifically like that. If it doesn't have the objective token, that's weird, right? Hmm. That's good. That may need an FAQ because you would expect this plunder reaction to be able to place those two that are off the board.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
and those specifically say when you do place them, you get to decide which side is going to be face up. The reaction itself says, "Hey, if you're placing it, you have to do objective side up. If there's no objective side, I wonder if you can technically
yeah.
take that reaction."
Hmm.
Hmm.
Okay, well, something to follow up about, I guess. That
Yeah.
is yet another thing that we, maybe hadn't even really realized until just right now.
Yeah.
Uh, this is what we mean. There's a lot of rule changes in this book. I guess if you are someone who is planning to play championship level games and you want to make sure that you're not going to get caught out by any rule stuff,
Yeah.
just read this book cover to cover, every
Yeah.
single word, because there's enough changes that are subtle enough that you might just completely miss them, because we
Yeah.
certainly did.
I mean, it does say when you are told to place a feature token during a round, unless specified otherwise, that player can decide which face of the feature token is face up. How that interacts with the plunder reaction when there is
Yeah.
no objective token is up. But the idea being that this plunder reaction will get to replace uh, feature tokens that have been removed from the board. Um, there's only kind of a handful of existing cards that are in rotation that can do that. I think Reavers have one. I think Iron Skulls
Yep.
boys have one. I'm sure
Hrothgorn.
Hrothgorn has one. So, and then
Uh,
you'll see Gnarl Spirit has at least one,
Three.
maybe two, three, three.
Yeah. Strange little side strategy that they've got. They can
Yeah.
remove feature tokens. Um, and then there's like a universal one where you can take it and put it on the fighter card, and then when they're like taken out of action, it
Oh
goes back
yeah,
onto
it's
the
like a
board.
destruction thing, or like where
Yeah,
you scamper or something like
I
that.
when I first read that card, I was like, who's gonna play this? Like, what is the point of doing this? Well, maybe now we know.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so not a lot of ways to do this, but it's probably going to be impactful at some point. It might even be something where you don't think about it right up until the moment when your opponent's like, and I'm going to react and place a feature token. And you're like, no.
Yeah. Um, I think there's some cards that benefit particularly from it, where like if you can get a cheap kill on somebody, uh, especially if you're, I mean, gosh, I feel like it always comes back to spike claws, but if they can manage to kill somebody on a starting hex in
Oh, yeah.
enemy or friendly territory, then all of a sudden they get to keep coming back onto that, So um, there's a lot to work through there. I think that'll be kind of a finesse move in this season.
Absolutely. Um, but yeah, so I mean, you got all three of these new rules. They kind of all work together into changing how this works. But I think you know, in setup, there's just going to be fewer tokens to try and occupy. So there's going to be more
Oh
of a
yeah.
fight to be on them. I think this
Yep.
brings down stock for stuff like Horrors in the Dark. It's going to be a lot
100%.
harder to
Yep.
set that up
Yep.
than not being able to flip things as easily. There's just going to be a lot more head games with that. Um,
What I like about that, like you mentioned Horrors in the Dark, and that is 100% valid. What I like about that is all of a sudden it feels like there's more. I felt like there were just a couple boards that I used because I was like, yeah, this one is flexible in the starting spaces, and I get to place enough tokens that I can do whatever I want. Now, if you want to run Horrors in the Dark, or if you suspect, yeah, so like you running Horrors in the Dark doesn't, but if you suspect your opponent is running Horrors in the Dark, you have to be like, okay, like let's not give cover, like printed cover hexes.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and that's good, right? Like
Yeah.
that plays. So
Anything
um,
anything that rewards you for knowing how to best set up the boards is
there you go.
probably a good thing.
Yep,
Um, that there's a skill in doing that, and it can completely change a game. And so, being rewarded for knowing how to do that, I think, is a good thing.
yep,
Um, you know, having a greater knowledge of the game should be a benefit,
yep,
and in this case, it definitely feels like it will be.
yep,
Uh, But I think with those three kind of lumped together, that is the last of the core rules changes.
is it possible that we hit them all?
I
Uh,
hope so, because it'll feel bad if we've for a third time somehow missed additional rules changes.
I mean, it could be like we said, like we're reading through this book, we're trying to find everything. It is worth saying, like there's this cool dynamic in the rule book itself where it is, I believe, the thickest rule book that we've ever had. I was doing a real therapeutic thing, which is to organize my hobby room.
Oh yeah.
Um, and man, it's just like serenity now to sit in here because it feels good. But one of the things I did was like I took every season's rule book and stacked them up, and I was putting them in one of the old seasons boxes, and you could feel them getting bigger and bigger and bigger as it went on.
Yeah.
And some of that is, clearly because more rules have been added, and some of it is because they're working to like really kind of codify some of the like language that they use.
Even just like adding all the charts and diagrams and stuff to
Yes. Yep.
explain exactly in detail, like here's the flow chart of how all of this stuff works. That like, man, in Shadespire we just had to guess. We had no
Yep.
idea.
Yeah. And this is, from that perspective, from the perspective of somebody who really wants to break down the rules as best they can, this is the best rule book they've written. And for somebody who's just coming in, what they've done is they've written, here's the rule, this is how you, this is what we mean when we say place a feature token, or this is what we mean when we say, the, uh, an attack action or something like that. And then the next thing they have is these boxes that are set aside, and they are advanced rules. And if you are just getting started, you don't need to read that. Like that is something that is like not corner case, but like it's not going to come up. If you were to just ignore that, you could probably play just fine. But if you want to get like, play like we have, since the start of the game, and we're pretty familiar with it, you do want to have that on board. But it talks about, that's the, in those boxes where it comes up with, like I don't know, like with tokens and counters, like uh, tokens are placed here, counters are placed here. When a fighter goes out of action, uh, counters are removed, tokens are removed, and like, what does that mean, or something like that. And that for most people who are new to the game, they don't care. Like, this guy's dead. Like, why does it matter?
Yeah.
Why does it matter if they keep the 3 wound counters that was on him? It doesn't. 99% of the time, it does not matter that the counters that they had on him are removed. You need a specific thing to tell you that. And I think that's a pretty clever move. I think that makes the book more accessible.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Shows you where you can take your shortcuts to
yeah.
get up and playing.
Hmm.
I've had a similar experience with some of the more complex board games where it's like you start trying to play the game as you start to fumble through the rules because you're like, well, let's just get started, and then you're like, whoa, wait a minute, how does this work? Let me go find that. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh man, I wish I had just read all the rules before we started, because it's complex enough that if you didn't, you're missing stuff. Whereas
Yeah.
here, I think they lay out all the stuff you have to get through pretty easily, and
Yeah.
then you can go back for the minutia when you get
Yeah.
to that point, which is good.
100%. Yeah.
Very good. Well, that is, man, that's a lot. Hopefully that's
Yeah.
enough for you, because that's the Gnarlwood box. And
Yeah.
that's just
Yeah.
just a quick touch on the warbands and the deck box.
Yeah.
It I think it's probably the most impactful new release we've ever had. And there's more stuff that changed in the last 3 seasons than I actually remembered having changed.
Yeah.
But this stuff, I think, will shake up the game in some pretty big ways. Some things that were so core to the game that we just took them for granted that are now different.
Yeah.
That is stuff that I never would have expected would have changed. So interesting times, fun times. There's going to be lots of new strategies in the game. It's a
Yeah.
great time to start playing the game because you'll be on kind of the same level as everyone else
Yeah.
in some respects.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. I mean, if it was just that objective token started face up and there's a whole, like we talked about the changes to Delve, that would be huge. But like, we've got the move and the charge thing. Like, there's,
yeah,
yeah, you're right. Like, this is a good time to be starting, because this is everybody's relearning, some of the core concepts of what it is to play this game.
yeah. So I'm very excited. I'm ready to go. I want this box to be out so that we can start playing with people, with all these new rules, with the new warbands, with just, let's get into the new world. We
Yeah,
know what
let's
everything
do
has
it.
been, and I'm excited. We we're kind of locked in the old world for a little while.
Yeah.
We're participating in the WTC Championship online,
Oh yeah.
and
That's the pre-Gore chosen meta, is what that
yeah,
is.
pre Gore chosen meta. So we're gonna be a number of weeks still playing in Nether Maze rules, and it's gonna be a little taxing, I think, to keep going back and forth between these
Yeah,
two rule
100%.
sets. But
I gotta talk to Frederick, because I think this, if it's an annual thing that lands around this time, like, they need to move it, because you can't do
yeah,
this kind
yeah,
of,
yeah,
you can't do like a locked list event right when the season's always going to be changing. But if we're doing double seasons,
yeah. Who knows?
I don't know.
But either way, I mean, it should be fun, and just don't be like us. Don't be doing that kind of thing where you're locking yourself in for, I don't know, what is it, 8 weeks.
Yeah.
But it'll be fun. Super excited. Anything else you want to touch on about Gnarlwood before we get out of here and get to bed?
Nothing's jumping to mind. I'm excited for this season. I'm excited. It's a thing where, like, you and I, we're just two people. We're just looking at this. We're giving you our opinions based on having had some time to process it. We're trying to give you something that you can look at on that first day. We got to play some with it, and we can give that perspective, having had some reps with it. But the community is so much stronger than any one person or any one content creation outlet or
Oh
whatever.
yeah.
And so, from our perspective, we're so excited for other people to like get into this and work on this in a way that 2 people can't.
Yeah,
And hopefully, soon 5 once we get the other guys onboarded. But um, it's always an exciting time to be in a new season, and this is no exception. And there's nothing here that makes me like worried that the game is going in a wrong direction. It's going in a new direction, but not a bad one, in my opinion.
absolutely. I think, we've mentioned many times before that deck building is always the most fun when the meta is completely upended. You've got
Yep.
whole new puzzles to figure out. That's
Yep.
super fun. This
Yep.
is like that times two.
Yep.
So super excited. I think people will start churning out decks, talking ideas. It's going to be lots of fun times in the community coming up here
Yeah.
pretty soon.
Yeah. No time like the present to go back to your eyes of the nine.
Oh
Phil.
yeah, of course. They're probably a little better now, actually. But we'll
Yeah,
maybe
deceitful step back in play,
there.
baby.
Yeah, there
Yeah.
it is, teleporting
Yeah.
onto those
Yeah.
feature tokens because the objectives are available again. Um, but we'll save that for another day. It is late. We've been talking for a while. Let's get out of here. And we've got plenty of stuff coming up. So be ready. We got some cool ideas coming from our new folks. We've got more stuff for us to cover. I'm sure we're going to try and figure out some sort of a battle report with these new warbands once we get championship decks built for them.
Believe that.
Yeah, it's going to be good times. But as always, if you have any feedback for us, anything that we talked about today, if we missed any rules, if you've got your box in hand and you're just listening while you're reading and you're like, hey guys, it's like huge stuff that you missed, let us know. Reach out to us at WTHcast on Twitter or whatthehexcast@gmail.com. Or if you want to come and find us in our Discord or any other Underworld's social media platform and you want to just call us out,
Yeah.
by all means.
Dear idiots. Yeah.
How could you? How
Yeah.
dare you?
First of all, how dare you?
Yeah. Of course, insert meme here.
Narrator's note. They did forget something. Yes, as Warhammer community pointed out, and we managed to overlook, the reaction windows are no longer limited to 1 per window. They are limited to 1 per player per window, which means that you don't block an opponent's reactions in a given window and vice versa. We can speculate a couple reasons for this change. One is that just for general quality of life, the timing on this was always kind of fuzzy. The windows were getting more and more explicitly laid out, but how long you had to wait to allow your opponent the chance to react before you took a reaction yourself to avoid the situation where you react and they say, oh no, actually I was going to do one, and that actually blocks yours. This is just a better situation where they can be better defined. On top of that, there is some design space that gets opened up. There are cards that are problematic because of the window that they occupy. Most notoriously, this was a problem with Hunter's Reflexes, a card that let Hrothgorn block any and all reactions, basically, that happened after an enemy activation. It was not a card that was otherwise a problem, but specifically because of how badly it messed with that window. This prevents some of those unintended consequences of those windows interacting. So I think it's good. You lose a very little piece of very high-end deck building where you might try to specifically plan to block a reaction that's particularly prevalent in the meta, but I think that's pretty corner case. So my take is positive. This is actually going to be a little bit of a boost for Rippas, if anything, because they specifically have that bite attack that happens after an activation, and that could periodically be blocked by certain things. So you can still kind of have to plan around it with your own cards and such, and depending on the reactions that you get, you may be able to maneuver because the stack is resolved in a particular way, and we'll let you read that more specifically, but it's the activating turn first. But the other one that we did notice and then just somehow managed to overlook entirely is that upgrades are now continuously monitored. If they have a restriction. For instance, an attack action upgrade can't go on a beast. If you become a beast, any attack action upgrades you have break unless they tell you otherwise, specifically on the card. This used to be explicitly the other way, where you only checked when applying the upgrade. This has to have arrived specifically for that example of things that are limited, can't or are not supposed to be on beasts, specifically with the Gnarl Spirit pack, which is going to be changing in and out of beast form quite a bit. We also see it with large fighters. As we see more and more cards that are restricted away from going on large fighters, they have made sure that you can't make your fighter large after the fact to try and take advantage of that. So just a little bit of extra deck building attention to detail there for you. We are going to send it back, and by we, I mean you and me, because Phil's not here to see my shameful mistake. Back to the show.
We mentioned earlier with some of the lore stuff, but by all means, especially now that we're tying more into the Warcry setting, go get on themortalrealms.com. Go check out the other podcasts that we have there.
Yep.
Dogs of Warcry, especially, they just getting into this area of the story as well.
Just started their season 5.
Yeah.
Season 5, episode 1 just dropped for those boys.
Yeah. So if you want more about the story and the setting that we're in, go check them out. It should be a good time. There should be a lot more cross pollination between those two channels. So if you are even remotely interested in Warcry, go check them out. They do a really great job. They're one of the few, surprisingly, Warcry podcasts available even. So
I know, for a game like that, you know.
Yeah, I know. So go check them out. They do great stuff.
So before we move on, shout out to the Story Phase. We are about to record an interview with David Geimer, one of the Black Library authors.
Oh yeah,
that's a first for us. It's a really big deal. We're excited to be able to do that. We've read a lot of books. He writes one of our favorite characters, Hamilcar.
The best.
I'm going to be part of that tomorrow. That's going to come out whenever Aaron gets around to editing it, and he's not going to listen to this, so I'm just going to dog him. It's going to take forever. That guy. I'd say it's because he's a perfectionist, but man, you've heard his stuff is not perfect. Any more like digs I can get on this guy while he can't defend himself?
Wow.
I don't know.
I mean, I'm sure there's a few, but maybe we'll have to stockpile a few just in case.
Call it there. But anyway, there's great stuff going on in the network. We're proud of what we do here. We love having our new guys on, but there's cool stuff going on elsewhere, and we'd like you to take a look at that too.
Absolutely. And as always, we need to give some credit to Games Workshop, just as a thank you for getting us this box early so that we could get through all of this review. I mean, having this with time to make the mistakes and realize that we missed a whole bunch of stuff is actually really great, because otherwise we could have recorded an episode where we really sounded dumb.
Dumber.
Yeah. Emphasis there. But yes, so definitely appreciate that. Kind of already mentioned that we've got a whole bunch of different ideas of stuff that could be coming up next. Which one it will be, you'll have to just wait and find out with us, because we don't know either. I almost dread asking this because I'm not ready, but did you have a quiz for me today?
Yeah, I feel so sorry for you. This is so hard. There's like 128 new cards in this, and you have looked through them all, but I don't know. I'm
sure I didn't read all the flavor text.
I'm sure also. I will give you I'll give you 2 hints here. It is universal.
Okay.
And it features a war band that you are partial to.
Okay.
All right. It might be best if some of the hidden treasures of the Gnarlwood stayed buried.
Ooh. So I'm thinking it's from Daring Delvers.
Correct. Go on.
And I'm going to guess Uncovered Secrets.
He got it.
Oh
Oh my
my
gosh.
goodness.
You
Uh,
know I couldn't stay away from the Three Glory Surge, you know?
because I was thinking, I was like, okay, the hint about it being like a warband I'm partial to really helped.
Yeah.
Because I was like, okay, there's not actually that many that have a warband and I was like, okay, there's Eyes of the Nine and there's Reavers, and it's probably like Delvers. So what have I got to work with in there? And I was like, okay, there's like two choices, and I
Yeah.
don't think it's the Reavers one because they probably don't give a crap about the secrets. So yeah, there you go. Somehow managed to pull that rabbit out of the hat.
Yeah. Well done. All right.
Okay. Uh and recommended listening then. What do we got for
Yeah,
folks?
this is a burn on me because of how much I talked about there being
Oh yeah.
webs and everything like that. There are no webs in the Gnarlwood apparently, but I did pick "Web" by the Roots, and that's from their album "The Tipping Point." It's a good track. You should check it out.
Well,
Uh,
they're all bangers, right? I mean,
yeah,
maybe
nonstop.
maybe it's worth mentioning. I don't know if we've ever called this out before. We have actually put all of these into a Spotify playlist that
Yep,
exists someplace. I don't
yep.
remember what it's called. But
What the heck's recommended listening?
there you go. Easy enough. I
Yep,
should have known that.
yep.
So if you ever want to just like jam out to all of the recommended listening, there you go. You gotta
89 tracks of stuff at this point.
hot.
Actually, God, man, did I make myself wrong here? When Battle for Salvation, when Max showed up on, he tried to like put 20 songs onto our recommended
Oh
listening.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
that terrorist tried to blow us up, but I don't remember how many of those I translated in there. Anyway, yeah, it's
Still,
eclectic, but it's fun.
yeah. It's just fun. Uh, it's late. Let's close this
God,
out.
so late. Yeah.
For what the hex? I've been Phil.
And I've been Davy. And we are going to be less than 2 hours. So we got in under the wire. We're no Path to Glory.
Or story face.
Oh, God, it's so terrible. You be at like the 2 hour and 15 minute mark, and you're like, oh man, we're almost done. Like so great. Like we're gonna get out of here, and then like you like
Nope.
blink, and it's like 3 hours. 3 hours and 50. Like an hour passed. How do we make no progress? Like what is going on? It's so terrible.
Creeping up on hour 4 here.
Yeah.
It's now almost past, midnight, mid
Yeah.
12:30.
Yeah.
Whew. Well,
Ooh
there
boy.
you go. Another dig for Aaron. I can
Yeah.
cue that one up for post credits.
I
Yeah,
think Drom.
absolutely.
Yeah. I was gonna say Drom Treng. There's some dwarven dialect thing, but I can't remember if that's a curse or not. So
Well,
yeah,
we'll just stay away from that one then.
yeah. God, I give myself so much to edit to either cut that out or leave it in and make it sound cool.
Well, I guess if you could check it and you find out that is what you actually wanted to say, you
Yeah,
can definitely
save me
keep it
from
in there.
myself here.
Sound real cool. Um, Warcry guys, I'm trying to remember what the other part of the name is, but
This
anyway,
podcast
they're
break is
basically
brought to you by Noble
yeah,
Knights card sleeve
um,
selection.
yeah. Anyway,
Hey, so Gnarlwood, huh?
yeah, man, here it comes.